September 9th, 1000 AD. The Baltic Sea stretches flat and merciless beneath 11 Norwegian longships lashed together like a wounded animal, making its last stand. On the towering deck of the Long Serpent, the largest warship ever built in Scandinavia, King Olaf Tryggvason watches 70 enemy sails converge from every direction. Danish warships slide in from the south, their dragon-headed prows cutting through morning fog. Swedish vessels close from the north, oars working in perfect rhythm. Norwegian rebel ships, men who once called Olaf their king, approach from the east, hungry for revenge. The trap has been months in the making. Every ship positioned, every escape route sealed. Jarl Sigvaldi, supposedly Olaf's ally, deliberately separated the Norwegian fleet hours earlier, leaving these 11 vessels alone in hostile waters. The bait was Olaf's own certainty that no one would dare challenge him. The architect of the ambush isn't here to watch her revenge unfold. She's in Denmark, wife to King Svein Forkbeard, whispering reminders about a Norwegian king who once struck her across the face with his glove and called her an old, faded woman. Olaf's master archer, Einar Tambarskjelve, tests his bowstring and counts enemy banners. 70 ships against 11. The mathematics are simple and brutal. But Olaf refuses to run. He orders his vessels bound together with iron chains and thick rope, transforming his small fleet into a floating fortress. The Long Serpent anchors the center, 45 meters of oak and iron, her sides rising high as ocean-going merchant ships, her deck bristling with 574 of Norway's finest warriors. Around her, the 10 remaining longships form a defensive wall, their crews watching the enemy circle closer. In the next 6 hours, this 11-ship formation will inflict casualties that shock even veteran Viking commanders. The Long Serpent's high fighting decks will become killing platforms that butcher wave after wave of enemy warriors. Superior Norwegian seamanship and combat discipline will sink or capture multiple coalition vessels. The smaller fleet will fight with such ferocity that Danish and Swedish commanders will later describe it as the most savage naval battle of the Viking Age. But the outcome was never in doubt. This is the story of how 11 Viking longships nearly destroyed the combined fleets of 3 kingdoms, and how one woman's memory proved longer than any king's life. To understand why 70 ships wanted Olaf Tryggvason dead, you need to understand what happened in a Swedish hall 3 years earlier when he insulted the wrong woman. Her name was Sigrid Storeda, Sigrid the Haughty, Queen Dowager of Sweden, widow of King Eric the Victorious, mother to the future Swedish king. She was powerful, wealthy, politically connected, and pagan to her bones. When King Olaf came courting in 997, fresh from his forcible Christianization of Norway, he brought 2 gifts, a golden arm ring and an ultimatum. Marry him, convert to Christianity, or be rejected. Sigrid listened to his proposal. The sagas record her response with precision. I will not abandon the faith I have kept, nor my kinsman before me, nor shall I object to your belief in the God you prefer. A diplomatic refusal, a reasonable boundary. She would keep her gods, he could keep his. Olaf's rage was immediate. He called her a dog of a heathen and an old, faded woman. Then he struck her across the face with the glove he was holding and stormed from her hall. Sigrid remained seated. When her attendants rushed forward, she raised one hand and spoke 5 words that would echo across Scandinavia for the next 3 years. This may someday be thy death. In Viking culture, reputation was power. Personal insults demanded blood price or eternal shame. But Sigrid was patient. She didn't raise armies or issue threats. She simply remarried to Svein Forkbeard, King of Denmark, Olaf's most dangerous rival. In her new husband's ear, she whispered reminders about Norwegian arrogance, about Christian zealots who tortured pagans into conversion, about a king who struck women and expected no consequences. Meanwhile, Olaf was busy making more enemies. His Christianization of Norway wasn't missionary work. It was systematic terror. The sagas detail his methods with uncomfortable clarity. This brutality unified Norway under Christianity within 5 years. It also created a long list of people waiting for Olaf to make a mistake. By the year 1000, Sigrid had built her coalition. Svein Forkbeard brought Denmark's fleet, revenge for Olaf stealing his sister Thiri and marrying her without permission. King Olaf Skotkonung of Sweden brought his ships. He was Sigrid's son, raised on stories of the insult his mother had endured. Jarl Eirik Hakonarsson brought Norwegian rebels. His father had ruled Norway before Olaf murdered him and seized the throne. 3 kingdoms, 1 target. And Sigrid's quiet voice behind them all, reminding her allies that the Christian king of Norway thought he could strike women without consequence. The trap was ready. They just needed Olaf to sail into it. Olaf Tryggvason built the Long Serpent in the winter of 999 as a statement of dominance. She wasn't just a warship. She was a declaration that Norway had surpassed every other maritime power in Scandinavia. Her keel measured 74 ells, roughly 45 meters of solid oak hewn from a single tree. 34 rowing benches lined each side, meaning 68 oars and crews to match. When fully manned, she carried 574 warriors. Her dragonhead prow and gilded stern rose higher than any longship afloat. Her sides stood as tall as ocean-going merchant vessels, giving her fighting decks a commanding height advantage in ship-to-ship combat. The ship's designer, a master craftsman named Thorberg, had initially sabotaged the construction when he returned from a trip to find his work completed without him. He'd cut deep notches along one side of the hull in jealous rage. When discovered, he saved his own life by claiming he could fix the damage, then proceeded to shave down the opposite side to match, actually improving the ship's lines in the process. The story became legend. So did the vessel. The Long Serpent could outfight any warship in Viking waters. She could intimidate enemies into surrender without battle. She made Olaf's fleet the most feared naval force in the North Atlantic. But at Svolder, she became a trap. The ship's height, designed to dominate combat, meant her crew couldn't quickly abandon ship once enemies closed in. Her massive size made her too valuable to scuttle, too iconic to leave behind. And her psychological importance to Norwegian morale meant Olaf would never willingly flee while she floated. When the ambush began on September 9th, Olaf had only 11 ships. He'd sent the rest of his fleet ahead days earlier, confident in his reputation and the Short Serpent's speed. When 70 enemy sails appeared on the horizon, retreat was already impossible. The coalition had chosen their position perfectly. Open water where superior numbers mattered, narrow enough that the Norwegian ships couldn't scatter. Olaf's response was tactically brilliant and strategically hopeless. He ordered his 11 ships lashed together in a tight formation with the Long Serpent at the center. This created a mobile fortress that eliminated the coalition's ability to surround individual vessels. Any enemy ship attempting to board would face concentrated Norwegian firepower from multiple decks. The high sides of the Long Serpent would force attackers to climb under arrow fire and spear thrusts. The defensive formation turned Olaf's numerical disadvantage into a temporary tactical advantage. But it also locked his fleet into a battle of attrition they couldn't win. Every ship lost couldn't be replaced. Every warrior killed couldn't retreat to fight another day. The iron chains binding the vessels together were as much shackles as strategy. The Long Serpent, the most magnificent warship ever built in Norway, was about to become history's most beautiful coffin. The coalition attacked in waves, testing Norwegian defenses before committing their main force. They learned quickly. Charging the Long Serpent directly was suicide. The ship's height advantage meant Norwegian archers could fire down onto enemy decks while standing behind protective rails. Spearmen could thrust downward at climbers attempting to scale the hull. The moment enemy warriors reached boarding range, they entered a killing zone where superior position mattered more than superior numbers. The first Danish ships to close with the Norwegian line took catastrophic losses. Arrows rained down from the Long Serpent's mast, where Einar Tambarskjelve, Norway's master archer, picked off enemy commanders with precision that bordered on supernatural. Men trying to throw grappling hooks were speared before completing the throw. Boarding parties that managed to hook the Norwegian vessels found themselves fighting uphill against fresh defenders while being shot from above by Einar's secondary archers. The mathematics of ship-to-ship combat favored defense when positions were fortified. A single Norwegian warrior at the rail, protected and fighting downward, could hold off 3 or 4 attackers climbing exposed. The Long Serpent's crew exploited this mercilessly. But mathematics also favored numbers over time. The coalition could rotate fresh ships into the attack while pulling back damaged vessels. They could replace casualties from reserve crews. The Norwegians fought with everyone they had, and every loss made the next defense weaker. The outer Norwegian ships began falling first. The smallest longships, positioned at the edges of the formation, absorbed the initial assaults. Their crews fought with ferocious discipline, making the coalition pay in blood for every meter of deck space. When a ship was finally overwhelmed, its surviving warriors cut the binding ropes and tried to fight their way to the Long Serpent's sides, where Olaf's men pulled them aboard. Each captured Norwegian vessel meant the defensive perimeter shrank. More coalition ships could now attack the Long Serpent directly. The killing zone grew more crowded. The mathematics shifted incrementally toward the inevitable. The Long Serpent's high decks continued exacting a terrible price. Historical accounts from the battle describe coalition ships withdrawing with half their crews dead or wounded, only to be replaced by fresh vessels. The Norwegian formation, meanwhile, had no reinforcements. Every casualty was permanent. Around the 5th hour of combat, the coalition had reduced Olaf's fleet to 3 ships, the Long Serpent and 2 escorts barely functional, their crews exhausted and depleted. Norwegian bodies littered the decks. Blood made the planking treacherous. The warriors still standing were wounded, tired, and running low on arrows and spears. But they hadn't broken. The Long Serpent remained afloat, her dragonhead prow still defiant, her king still commanding from the high deck. The coalition fleet had lost or severely damaged at least a dozen ships, possibly more. The smaller Norwegian force had inflicted casualties that would be remembered in sagas for centuries. The problem was simple. Courage couldn't multiply warriors. Skill couldn't create arrows that didn't exist. Superior tactics couldn't overcome 7-to-1 disadvantages indefinitely. And the coalition was preparing its final assault. Jarl Eirik Hakonarson commanded the final wave personally. He'd been watching the battle from his flagship, studying Norwegian tactics, waiting for exhaustion to set in. Now he moved his ship into position opposite the Long Serpent's stern, where Olaf stood directing the defense. On the Long Serpent's deck, Einar Tambarskjelve drew his massive warbow, a weapon so powerful few other men could string it, and aimed at Eirik's head. The distance was extreme for accurate archery, but Einar was no ordinary archer. His first shot passed so close to Eirik's skull that the Jarl felt wind from the arrow's passage. His second shot struck the tiller inches above where Eirik was standing, embedding deep into the wood. Eirik identified the threat immediately. He turned to a man called Finn, possibly a Laplander, certainly an elite marksman, and gave a simple order. "Shoot that tall man by the mast." What happened next became the most famous moment in Viking naval warfare. Finn aimed not at Einar, but at Einar's bow. As the Norwegian archer drew his bowstring back for a third shot, Finn released. His arrow struck the center of Einar's bow at the exact instant Einar was at full draw. The massive weapon split in two with a crack that echoed across the battle like breaking timber. King Olaf, fighting nearby, heard the sound and shouted, "What broke with such noise?" Einar's response entered history. "Norway, King, from your hands." The symbolism was perfect and terrible. The breaking of the bow announced the breaking of the kingdom. Olaf tried to salvage the moment. He threw his own royal bow to Einar. "Take my bow and shoot!" Einar caught it, tried to draw it, and found it laughably weak compared to his custom weapon. Too weak, he declared, for the bow of a mighty king. He threw the bow aside, grabbed a sword and shield, and fought on. But the moment had spoken truth. The Norwegian defense was breaking. Einar's bow had been the weapon holding back the coalition's command structure, killing officers, disrupting coordination, creating psychological pressure. Without it, the Long Serpent's ranged advantage vanished. Eric's ships closed the final distance. Grappling hooks flew. Boarding parties crashed onto the Long Serpent's blood-soaked decks. The fighting became hand-to-hand butchery, swords against shields, axes against skulls, men slipping in gore and dying in heaps. The Norwegians fought with the desperation of trapped warriors. They gave ground meter by meter, killing coalition soldiers at rates that defied the numerical imbalance. But the mathematics were final now. For every Norwegian still standing, there were 7 enemies waiting their turn. Fresh coalition warriors poured onto the Long Serpent while Norwegian defenders had no reserves left to call. The battle's outcome stopped being a question. It became a countdown. When the last Norwegian defenders fell back to the Long Serpent's stern deck, Olaf Tryggvason stood surrounded by fewer than a dozen men. The rest were dead or too wounded to fight. Coalition warriors pressed from all sides. There was no relief force coming, no miraculous reversal, just the final mathematics of 70 ships against 11. What happened next remains one of history's most debated mysteries. Danish sources recorded by Adam of Bremen writing 80 years later claim Olaf chose suicide over capture. He jumped into the Baltic Sea wearing full armor, chain mail, weapons, helmet, guaranteeing drowning. The end, Adam wrote, befitted a man who had lived by violence and refused to die by enemy hands. Norwegian and Icelandic sources tell different stories. Some say Olaf jumped, but managed to shed his armor underwater and swam to a waiting Wendish ship that spirited him away. Others claim angels lifted him from the water. A few suggest he reached shore and fled to Rome, Jerusalem, or distant monasteries, living out his days in anonymous penance. His body was never found. No corpse was recovered. No definitive proof of death existed. This ambiguity became Olaf's final victory. The coalition conquered his fleet, captured the Long Serpent, and divided Norway among themselves. But they couldn't produce a body. And without a body, Olaf couldn't truly be dead. Rumors of sightings persisted for years. Men swore they'd seen him in distant lands, living under assumed names, seeking redemption for his brutal reign. The mystery served Norway's collective memory better than martyrdom would have. A dead king could be forgotten. A vanished king became legend. The warrior so formidable that even death couldn't hold him. The zealot whose faith might have delivered miraculous escape. The tyrant whose crimes were so great, he fled God's judgment by fleeing the world entirely. Jarl Eirik claimed the Long Serpent as his prize. The ship that had terrified Scandinavia now sailed under the banner of the man who'd destroyed her king. It was a calculated humiliation, proof that no vessel, however magnificent, could save rulers from the enemies they'd created. The coalition divided Norway into thirds. Denmark took the south. Sweden claimed tribute from the east. Jarl Eirik ruled the west and north as a vassal of both kingdoms, effectively ending Norwegian independence for a generation. Olaf's forced Christianization crumbled within months. Without royal terror to enforce conversion, many Norwegians quietly returned to the old gods. Churches were abandoned. Pagan practices resumed. The Christian kingdom Olaf had tortured into existence vanished almost as completely as he did. But the battle itself, 11 ships against 70, the Long Serpent's towering defiance, Einar's bow, breaking alongside Norway's sovereignty, became the defining naval engagement of the Viking Age. Not because of who won, but because of how fiercely the losing side fought. The sagas couldn't stop telling the story. The casualties were too shocking, the courage too absolute, the image too perfect. 11 Norwegian longships lashed together, surrounded by enemies, fighting until the sea swallowed their king and their kingdom. Sigrid the Haughty never appeared at Svolder. She didn't need to. Revenge doesn't require witnesses, just results. 3 years after Olaf struck her, he was dead or disappeared. His kingdom was partitioned, his forced conversion collapsed, and the Long Serpent sailed under enemy banners. Sigrid had methodically built the coalition that destroyed him. She married Denmark's king, giving him both political motive and personal anger. Olaf had stolen Svine's sister. She ensured her son commanded Sweden's fleet and likely encouraged Jarl Eirik, reminding him that the man who murdered his father deserved no loyalty. Whether she ordered Olaf's death or simply created the perfect conditions, the outcome was the same. The man who called her a faded heathen was erased from power. A slap became the reason 70 ships hunted 11. In Viking politics, memory was weapon. Sigrid cultivated every grievance and waited for the moment to strike. She proved that patient rage, used through marriages and alliances, could achieve what armies alone could not. The sagas barely mention her role. Later historians preferred to credit territorial disputes and religion rather than personal vendetta. But the chronology is clear. Her marriage to Svein came before the coalition. Her son legitimized Sweden's fleet, and her position as Denmark's queen aligned the forces that trapped Olaf with no escape. She lived another 14 years, dying around 1014 and outliving Olaf by more than a decade. Her son converted Sweden peacefully. Her legacy included 3 kings, Olaf Skotkonung, Harald II of Denmark, and Canute the Great, whose empire dwarfed Olaf's ambitions. The woman Olaf dismissed as old and faded birthed and guided kingdoms that eclipsed him. Her power came through memory, patience, and political ruthlessness. Olaf ruled through fear. Hers shaped Scandinavia for generations. Did she feel satisfaction? The sagas don't say. Perhaps she smiled, perhaps she simply nodded, or perhaps she remembered the 5 words she'd spoken after Olaf struck her. "This may someday be thy death." She was right, and she ensured it. The Battle of Svolder shattered the romantic myths later centuries built around Viking combat. There was no glorious frenzy, no divine rescue, just cold arithmetic. 11 Norwegian ships faced 70. Superior seamanship, tight defensive formation, and the Long Serpent's towering height let Olaf's men inflict disproportionate casualties, crippling or sinking perhaps a dozen coalition vessels and killing hundreds. But 7-1 numbers eventually ground skill and courage down into blood and exhaustion. The coalition lost ships, Norway lost its king and its independence. Both truths matter. Svolder revealed the real nature of Viking warfare. Disciplined crew coordination, clever positioning, and ship design mattered far more than berserker heroics. The Long Serpent's high sides saved lives for hours, but no ship, no matter how advanced, could overcome empty quivers and relentless waves of enemies. The aftermath was just as brutal. Without Olaf's terror enforcing Christianity, Norway slid back into paganism almost immediately. His violent conversion campaign collapsed in months. Only in the next generation, through St. Olaf's martyrdom and slower persuasion, did Christianity finally take firm root. The Long Serpent itself became Jarl Eirik's prize, the perfect reminder that even the greatest warship serves only the captain who controls it. It couldn't save Olaf. It simply changed flags and kept sailing. Einar Tambarskjelver, whose bow snapped in the battle's final moments, survived, either by swimming or being pulled from the water. Ironically, he went on to become one of Norway's most powerful nobles, outliving nearly everyone from Svolder and dying in 1050 during a political ambush. The sagas remember Svolder as the day 11 ships nearly broke 70. History remembers something simpler: personal insult turning into political disaster and superior tactics stretched to their limits. Olaf vanished into the Baltic. His kingdom was divided. Sigrid the Haughty's long memory delivered its revenge, and the legend survived because the Norwegians came so close, almost enough to change everything, but not enough to win.